Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we continue with Part 41, Gnostic Siglae Symbols, Legends Explained, Part 4, The Figured Monuments of Gnosticism, from the Gnostics and Their Remains, Ancient and Medieval, by C.W. King. Part 4, The Figured Monuments of Gnosticism. The Figured Monuments of Gnosticism, Gnostic Siglae Symbols, Legends Explained. The inscriptions in Greek characters upon Gnostic talismans are frequently interspersed with mystic figures, formed out of straight lines set at right angles to each other and intermingled with dots. These lines Bellermann plausibly enough supposes to represent the sacred lots, of the same nature as the celebrated sorters Antiates, held in the hands of the much-consulted Fortuna of Antium. In their usual form, these lots were only little sticks and balls taken up by the handful from an urn and thrown at random on the ground. The diviner examined the patterns thus produced by their casual collocation and predicted the future from them according to the rules of his art. Bellermann goes on to suppose that the figures on our talismans represent certain configurations of the lots, regarded as peculiarly lucky to the consulter. This explanation is supported by the geomancy of the modern Arabs, where lines drawn at haphazard on the sand by a stick held between the fingers are interpreted by persons professing that method of divination. Each tribe either found or introduced in the Kaaba their domestic worship. The temple was adorned or defiled with 360 idols of men, eagles, lions, and antelopes, and most conspicuous was the statue of Hebel, of red agate, holding in his hand 7 arrows, without heads or feathers, the instruments and symbols of profane divination. Gibbon, chapter 42. Our own divination by means of tea grounds is carried on upon the same principle, the fortuitous arrangement of the particles producing to the experienced eye definite pictures and letters of the alphabet. These siglae, however, may possibly have had another origin. The regular badge of the magus, as prescribed in the Vendidad, is a bundle of divining rods, 3, 7, or 9 in number. Hence the rebuke of Hosea, "My people ask counsel of sticks, and their staff declareth it unto them." These same divining rods placed upon the altar are commonly represented upon the Magian signets bearing for official type the mobed at his devotions, and may therefore be supposed to have passed down to the talisman makers of later times. The ancient Teutons practiced the same method of divining future events. A shoot of a fruit tree was cut into pieces, each being distinguished by certain marks, notis quibus dam, probably meaning runes. The consulter threw them down at random on a white cloth. With eyes turned to heaven, he took up 3 separately and interpreted the response from the inscriptions upon them. That others amongst these angular forms are numerals is certain from the nature of the case, and from Horapollo's express declaration that the Egyptians represented 10 by the figure as seen here, and 100 by the same 4 times repeated in the form of a square, thus as seen here. 10 being the perfect number of the Valentinian Creed, whose fountainhead was Alexandria, its frequent appearance amongst the religious formulae of the sect is naturally to be looked for. The primitive Egyptian numerals were of the simplest kind, but their abbreviated combinations ultimately became distinct symbols for the different days of the month, and out of these the Arab astrologers concocted their own system. This circumstance affords reason for another solution, that some of these siglae indicate the particular days connected with the astrological intention of the talisman. Some of these siglae may be recognized in the inscriptions in an unknown character, cut in the hard sandstone rock, and very numerous about Silsilis, Upper Nubia, where they accompany figures of elephants, giraffes, and ostriches, all animals long since extinct in that country. Specimens were published by Greville Chester in the Archaeological Journal for 1861, page 274. And besides all these, there is every probability that these siglae include actual cuneiform letters belonging to the Assyrian alphabet, but their forms somewhat corrupted by the semi-Greek wizard, who employed them in ignorance of their true nature. The Assyrian language, being considered as late as the times of Iamblichus peculiarly grateful to the heavenly powers, What more reasonable than that some at least of these invocations should continue to be couched in their original ciphers? Be it remembered, the cuneiform character was the national one of the whole Persian Empire down to the Macedonian conquest, and must have been preserved in religious usages long after that event by the Magi. They, at least, were a very unlikely class to trouble themselves about the Greek alphabet or Greek literature, professing, like the Talmudists, a pious horror for both. This is well exemplified on the restoration of the native dynasty under the Sasanians. Greek, employed for 4 centuries by the Parthian line, is at once expelled from the coins by the Pahlavi character, true daughter of the primitive cuneiform. There is moreover one all-sufficient reason for seeking the origin of these inexplicable siglae at Babylon. They constituted a religious stenography. The Babylonians attached to each god a certain numeral, which may be used in the place of his proper emblem, and may even stand for his name in an inscription, Rawlinson Ancram Monarchies 3, 466, to give those of the principal deities. First triad, An equals 60, Bel equals 50, Hoa equals 40, second triad, Moon equals 30, Sun equals 20, Air equals 10, Beltis or Melita equals 15, Nergal or Mars equals 12, Nu or Saturn equals 10. Of the other planets, the numerals have not been discovered, but their names are Nebo, Mercury, Merodach, Jupiter, Ishtar, Venus. The great gods are Anu, Pluto, Bel, Jupiter, Hoa, Neptune. Their consorts are respectively Anat, Beltis, Davkana. The minor gods are Sin or Hurke, answering to the later Lunus Deus, San the sun, Vid the ether. Their respective consorts are the Great Lady, Gula or Anahit, Tula or Shula. The Pythagoreans had a symbolism of the same nature, denoting Minerva by an equilateral triangle, Apollo by unity, strife by the numeral 2, justice by 3, and the supreme being by 4. In the Egyptian ritual papyrus, Thoth is addressed as the second Hermes by his mystic name of the god A. I find a very strong confirmation of my belief that the Gnostic powers were similarly designated by their numerals. In Rasper's gem, number 601, where thus is inscribed in the exergue under a serpent coiled into a cartouche containing several of the siglae under consideration. Now this legend, to be explained further on, is, when written in full, always followed by the names of the archangels, whence it may justly be inferred the same names are still here, but represented in their mystic form. The Turks represent the great name Allah by an oval crossed with intersecting lines, which is often seen stamped on their old armor for an amulet. Now this very mark occurs in the Gnostic set, and it is more than probable that its true meaning is preserved in the Turkish tradition. The great names constitute the very essence of every Gnostic spell. To begin, therefore, with their consideration is obviously the most appropriate and propitious mode of approaching this part of our work. Pandere resalta terra et caligine mersas. There are 3 titles perpetually occurring and consequently to be supposed denoting beings of the highest importance in the Gnostic hierarchy of heaven. Their meaning was unknown until the fortunate discovery of the Grand Valentinian Gospels. The Pistis Sophia informed us that they are the holy names of the 3 thus, who are thus a power emanating from whom resides in the planet Mars. Thus, in Goodwin's Magic Papyrus, the Serapean Divination, number 1, names this power. Appear and give heed unto him who was manifested before fire and snow, thus seen here. For thou art he that did make manifest light and snow, terrible-eyed, thundering and lightning-swift-footed one. This papyrus, now in the British Museum, was bought of Atanasi, Swedish consul at Alexandria, who sold several others of the same nature to the Leiden Library. All are supposed to have been found together in a catacomb at Thebes, and to have formed the stock of some magician of the 2nd century of our era, as the handwriting leads us to infer. Goodwin edited the Brit Museum specimen for the Cambridge Antiquarian Society in 1852 and enriched it with notes giving invaluable assistance to all who studied Gnostic remains. In Mercury, and thus in Venus. Above this triad is one still higher, the 3 unseen gods, thus, the Heavenly Mother of Jesus, and thus, the 5 words written upon the shining vesture sent down to Jesus at his glorification were thus, the robe, the glorious robe of my strength. The same revelation furthermore imparts to the faithful the mystic names of the planets. Hearken now, I will tell unto you the incorruptible names of the planets, which be thus Saturn, thus Mars, thus Mercury, thus Venus, thus Jupiter. These be the incorruptible names of the same. Of these, the names from each triad are to be recognized upon talismans, thus most commonly of all, but no example of these planetary appellations has hitherto come to my knowledge. The Nasini, says Hippolytus, taught that the universe could not hold together unless the names of the great ones thus were uttered. These were thus, thus, thus. The first is the name of the Adamus who is above, the second of him who is below, the third of the Jordan that floweth upwards. Above are Mariam the sought after, and Jothor the great and wise, and Sephora she that seeth, and Moses. According to the textbook of another sect, the Paratai, thus is the power whom the ignorant and profane call Neptune. Thus is the steward of the east, thus of the west, called by the vulgar the Curetes. Thus is the ruler of the winds. Thus, or Osiris, rules the 12 hours of the night. Thus, or Isis, those of the day. Her sign is the dog star. Thus is Ceres, or the left-hand power of God, presiding over nutrition. Thus is the right-hand power that presides over the fruits of the earth. In the same doctrine, Shoza, called by the ignorant Neptune, who converts into a sphere the dodecagonal pyramid and paints with many colors the gate of that pyramid, has 5 ministers thus, the name of the 5th being lost. Hence it is probable that the strings of vowels so often found on these stones may contain the names of elementary genii similarly expressed. Origen quotes Celsus to the effect that the Egyptians made 36 or more demons or ethereal powers preside over the several parts of the body, giving some of their names Chumis, Chuachums, Gnat, Sichat, Bu, Eru, Erebiu, Romanor, and Reanur. Whoever therefore prefers being in health to sickness and happiness to trouble ought to pay all possible honor to these powers. Origen therefore accuses Celsus of attempting to divert men from the worship of the one God to that of 36 demons only known to Egyptian magicians, because he cannot understand how the name of Jesus, pronounced by the truly faithful, can cure the sick and those possessed by devils. The evidence for which is far stronger than that of the effect of the names of Chnumis, Sichat, and the rest of the Egyptian catalogue. In another place he shows it was not Moses only that knew the name of Abraham and his friendship with God, for that others, pagans, use the words the God of Abraham when they are driving out devils, and again the Egyptians use in their rites, from which they promise wonderful effects, the names of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Israel. Also, Origen mentions the use of the form the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob in incantations, and that the same is often to be met with in books of magic. He adds that the formula, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, who didst overwhelm the Egyptians and the king of the Egyptians in the Red Sea, was in common use against demons and the powers of evil. All this goes to prove that the talismans inscribed with the name of Chnumis and the other 35 demons named, who now by this assistance may be hereafter recognized, were of a medicinal character, whereas those with Abraham, equally common, were more properly of the nature of talismans. In the Book of Enoch, the Archangel Uriel gives us the mystic names of the 2 great luminaries. The names of the sun are these, one Ariares, the other Thomas. The moon hath 4 names, the first Asonga, the second Ebla, the third Benace, and the 4th Erai. The Pistis Sophia furnishes the adept with the key to the most important of the numerical ciphers. These be the names that I will give unto thee, even from the infinite one downwards. Write them with a sign, cipher, that the sons of God may manifest, understand, them out of this place. This is the name of the immortal one thus, and this is the name of the voice through whose means the perfect man is moved. Thus, these likewise are the interpretations of the names of the mysteries. The first is thus, the interpretation thereof thus. The second, which is thus, or which is thus. The interpretation whereof is thus. The third is thus, the interpretation whereof is thus. The fourth is thus, the interpretation whereof is thus. The fifth is thus, the interpretation whereof is thus, the which is over the throne thus. This is the interpretation of the second thus, which is thus, and the same is the interpretation of the whole name. To pass from the ciphers, where all is guesswork, to the actual inscriptions engraved legibly enough in the Greek character, but presenting us with what Jerome aptly terms mere tormenta verborum. Many of the more common formula Bellermann, by the aid of Hebrew, Coptic and Syriac, has satisfactorily explained. Of others, his interpretations are manifestly absurd. Thus seems to be the Chaldee Amarchel, a president. Thus, I am all the good spirit, or the universal genius of good. Thus the eye shall behold. Thus, Lord, thou art the Lamb. Professor Stiekel, in his essay De Gemma Abraxia Nondum Edita, Gene 1848, has acutely and satisfactorily elucidated some very important formulae, giving a key to the whole class. The necessity for employing Oriental languages in spells is curiously illustrated by Hippolytus's statement that the magicians of his time used to write the answers to the questions proposed to their demons, partly in Hebrew, partly in Greek letters. Thus, followed by the Greek words thus, declaration, manifestation, and healing is always attached to a figure of Venus Anadyomene and admits of the translation mountain of light. The Venus therefore seems adopted here for the Virgin of Light, who holds so high a place in the celestial hierarchy of the Pistis Sophia. At any rate, the sense of thus, mountain of light, strongly favors this acceptation. Thus exactly represents the Hebrew word signifying he hath seen the pleroma. Thus seen here it is rendered by Stiekel, Salama Zebam Yatsael equals peace unto the army of these, of the celestial eons. This agrees with the benediction pronounced by the Marcosians in administering the holy unction, peace be unto all upon whom this holy name rests. Some of these inscriptions display an evident affectation of obscurity by their transposition of parts of the same word front one line to another, the only key to which is the observing the different sizes of the characters employed, and taking those of the same size as belonging to the disjecta membra of the same word. A most instructive example of this artifice is supplied by the legend cut on the reverse of a magnificent Serapis head wood, which reads thus as seen here. This will only be translatable if transposed as follows seen here. Jehovah, the pure ether, the fire forever, the four Iau, where the four signifies the tetrad so conspicuous in the theogony of Marcus. Thus, which often occurs in these legends, may perhaps refer to the rabbinical Seir Pen. The primitive man made up of 213 numbers, the numerical value of the Hebrew letters in the name. This legend seems much of the same nature as the Greek one cut on a piece of copper, communicated to me by thus Elohim. The only word in the first legend not reducible to Hebrew is thus, but it seems to correspond to the ether of the copper piece, thus, our light, let thy goodness grant unto us a full lap. Whence the object of such a talisman would seem to be the procuring of fecundity. Thus represents the Hebrew word for fire. And this explanation is confirmed by the following scene here, accompanying a figure of Free on a gem elucidated by Froner in his Birsa. Part 1. Thus pursue then my foes unto destruction, O Lord, is found very appropriately engraven on the reverse of a sphinx, the recognized emblem of power and slaughter. Thus Jehovah the Creator, the Destroyer, Chaldee slightly corrupted, thus the providence of God, and thus the honor of God, and thus the will of God, thus the power of God, thus wisdom. These Coptic words thus designate the five emanations from the Godhead, viz. Phronesis, Logos, Nous, Dynamis, Sophia, thus enlightening mine eye, or thus enlightening me, Myrene. If thus and thus are really the same, it will be conclusive against two, where the ni is an affix. The form then might be thus enimere. Query, what of the thus? Thus placed on each side of the Chnupis serpent engraved in green jade, S.S. Lewis, is correct Hebrew for with me, which gives an appropriate sense if understood as a prayer for the constant presence of the protecting spirit. Thus, the Messiah be propitious unto me. The Syrian Alexander Severus expresses his indignation at the sight of a certain notorious rogue, Arabianus, coming to court by exclaiming, O Mana, O Jupiter, etc., where his native Our Lord he renders by Jupiter for the benefit of his Roman hearers. This word the monkish transcribers very naturally converted into Maria, thus which often accompanies the figure of the cynocephalus, seems to be equivalent to the phrase in the text. And as that beast belongs to Thoth, god of knowledge, this interpretation has at least appropriateness in its favor. Thus enlighten mine eyes. Thus, the Basilidan name for the Savior is written by Epiphanius thus, who ridicules it as an expression taken from Isaiah 28:10 without any regard to the real meaning of the words. Bellermann, however, thinks he has found a more sensible derivation for the title in Arabic, signifying strength upon strength, that is, the all-powerful, or else in the Coptic Kab, a lamp, and so implying the burning and the shining light. Thus, Mother, Plutarch informs us, was a title given to Isis. This word contains a plain allusion to the earth, lutum prometheum, whence man was taken. Thus and thus are translated by Sanchoniathon as Hades and only begotten, the offspring of the Phoenician Kronos. Thus for the Coptic, thus God, thus being, fount, salvation, food, thus, implying that Iao is the source, food, life, and salvation of the soul. Thus, light of light. Thus, protector, creator, rule, speak, O Lord, is a very common formula. Thus, written with many variations and followed by the names of the great angels, has been ingeniously deciphered by a learned Hebraist, Reverend R. Sinker, as representing the sound of Shengab Hor Anje Jehevo, they that stand before the mountain of God, that is, the angels of the presence. Thus life is seen on a field of the Roman gem bearing two figures of Providentia, with the sun and moon on the field overhead, Major Pierce. Three Greek characters often occur in juxtaposition, viz. The epsilon set on its back, a vertical line crossed by two horizontal strokes, and zeta. They stand for the numerals 5, 3, and 7, the triad, pentad, heptad, lucky and sacred numbers in the religious notions of the East. For the same reason, the inscriptions on our gems will be found to be arranged for the most part in either 3, 5, or 7 lines. This also accounts for the name Iao being often written with its elements repeated thus, for the sake of obtaining the venerated numeral 5, and again by introducing another vowel, eta. The holy name is repeated under 5 different forms seen here. The priest officiating, commonly figured in these designs, wears upon his head the kalantika, a square of purple cloth whence spring 2 flamingo feathers, a badge which made thus a synonym for the Egyptian priesthood. The staff in his hand, emblem of his office, has the serpent coiled 5 times about it. This sceptrum sacerdotale furnishes the true explanation of the meaning of many ancient insignia, beginning with Moses' wand, then the club of Aesculapius, and closing with its derivative, the rod in the spiral of SS that so constantly goes with the Agathodemon serpent upon the Chnufis gems. As for the geometrical figures so often introduced, they may be supposed to have had much the same import here as in the formulae of the Rosicrucians, who obtained these with other Gnostic paraphernalia, probably by tradition from the Arabs. For their pretended founder, the great unknown AS, is declared to have acquired his small learning at the College of Damascus. In their system, the square stands for the 4 elements, the triangle for the body, the spirit, and the life, and also for sun, moon, and Mercury. The last triad, Paracelsus, interprets by salt, sulfur, quicksilver, the 3 radical forces of nature according to his system. The rhombus represents the Orphic egg, out of which issued the whole creation. Phoenician numerals may, from the very nature of the case, be looked for amongst the marks that cannot be referred to the Greek alphabet. The notation was simplicity itself, 1 to 9 being expressed by vertical strokes, so many times repeated, 10 by a horizontal one, 20 by 2 such parallel to each other, sometimes slightly curving together. In the Palmyrene notation, 5 has a special cipher, a sloping line upon which in the middle stands another at right angles. It was to be expected that Samaritan characters should make their appearance upon the productions of a religion of which the reputed founder was a Samaritan, whose professed followers also formed an important sect as late as the times of Hippolytus. Stichel interprets the reverse legend on his above-quoted gem as having its commencing words written in this alphabet, thus seen here. He also points out that the important word orth, sign or token, is written in these legends in 4 different ways, as seen here. It is possible that in certain legends the letters, taken in an order known to one having the key, would give a definite meaning, and this suspicion is supported by the reversing of some of the characters. Certain it is that the Donatists adopted such a device in order to disguise their prescribed war cry from the victorious Catholics. A door lintel at Tebessa exhibits the well-known formula thus as seen here, to be read by the brethren, Deo laudes dicamus. A second lintel bears the same in monogram. The most famous spell of all, Abracadabra, is first mentioned by Cyrenus Sammonicus, the most learned Roman of his times and physician to Caracalla, to whom he dedicated his poetical Guide to Health, entitled De Medicina Praecepta Salubarima. This work, remarks Spartian, was the favorite study of the unfortunate Caesar Geta, for attachment to whose cause this true son of Apollo was afterwards put to death by the imperial fratricide. Severus Alexander also, who had known and loved Cyrenus, greatly admired his poetry, putting him on a level with Horace, as Lampridius's expressions seem to intimate. This high authority orders the word to be written out in the form of an inverted cone and declares it a virtue against all diseases. Thou shalt on paper write the spell divine, Abracadabra called in many a line, each under each in even order place, but the last letter in each line efface. As by degrees the elements grow few, still take away, but fix the residue, till at the last one letter stands alone and the whole dwindles to a tapering cone. Tie this about the neck with flaxen string. Mighty the good twill to the patient bring. Its wondrous potency shall guard his head, and drive disease and death far from his bed. The belief in the virtue of this recipe flourished through the Middle Ages. It seems alluded to in the Dialogue on Masonry, ascribed by Leland to Henry VI. For amongst the things that Masons conceal is the winnage of the faculty of Abrac, perhaps signifying the possession of this mystical arrangement of letters, unless indeed one chooses to suspect in this faculty a deeper sense, some traditionary knowledge of the ancient Abraxas religion. Again, Defoe mentions how people commonly wore the word written in the manner above prescribed as a safeguard against infection during the Great Plague of London. As for the etymology of the word, the most satisfactory yet offered is the compound of the Hebrew habraka, blessing, and dobara, speak, meaning the blessing of the mystic name, that is, utter the tetragrammaton, invoke the holy name of Jehovah, itself the mightiest of charms. By the mere utterance whereof the philosopher Theosebines, though unacquainted with magic, was able to cast out devils from all who applied to him for aid. It is very remarkable, considering its high repute, that no Gnostic stone bearing such an inscription should be known to exist. On the other hand, that normal address to thus, Ablanthalba, thou art our Father, is so found on talismanic jaspers arranged in the exact pattern recommended by Cyrenus for the paper spell, and probably so done in compliance with his directions. One is strongly tempted to discover in this same habracha the real origin of the equally famous title Abraxas. The Greek letters, constantly in use for numerals, at once presented their numeric value in every word to the practiced eye of the Kabbalist. The celebrated letter of Christ to Abgarus was, according to Sidrianus, sealed with the initials of the 7 Hebrew words, whose Greek interpretation was thus: at the mere sight of the seal, the king was healed of his gout and of his blade leprosy, all but a slight trace upon the face remaining to be cleansed by the waters of baptism. Sidrianus's Greek reads like a popular formula and may serve to explain the legend on the reverse of an Abraxas gem in my possession, as to be read thus: Jesus Christ, God of God, Jehovah. This inscription encloses the letters seen here placed conspicuously in the center, and which probably represent, as nearly as the 2 discordant alphabets allow, the Hebrew letters Jod, He, the Kabbalistic name of the Tikan, express image, or first emanation of the Godhead. The crescent and 7 stars, amongst which are scattered the mystical 7 vowels, has for reverse this formula as seen here. Its first line, but written thus, is cut in beautiful characters on the reverse of a caduceus within a wreath. Sinker reads it as seen here: essence, beauty, probably the rest are names of virtues. It is inconceivable that the Sephiroth, mightiest spell of all, should be omitted in these gems. It is made up of the 10 attributes of Jehovah, viz. The crown, wisdom, prudence, security, magnificence, goodness, glory, victory, fortitude, kingdom. There is consequently a probability that these names often lurk in the phonetic Hebrew, enveloping all in darkness. We have for guide the analogy of the present Arab talismans, consisting of the 99 epithets of Allah written on a scroll. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe and comment, and if you can please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.